Hello, and welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching my stories, I often unearth tons of intriguing historical information that does not end up in my books. So I've created this channel so I can share these tidbits with you. Before we get started, I wanted to say a big thank you to all our new subscribers who have joined us recently. Today, we're going to talk about U.S. revenue stamps. For those of you unfamiliar with them, U.S. revenue stamps have been around since the late 18th century. However, they were actually colorless, embossed impressions applied to taxable paper documents. Taxation is something that has never been tremendously popular with Americans, and the new American government kept it to a minimum. After all, it was excessive taxation by the British government without sufficient colonial representation in Parliament that triggered the country's War of Independence. There were no federal or state income taxes or sales tax, but taxes were levied on various types of paper transactions such as promissory notes, bills of exchange, bills of lading, insurance policies, power of attorney, stock certificates, patent letters, conveyances, leases, mortgage, commissions, and liquor licenses. During the Civil War, large sums of money were required to support the federal government effort. So, in 1862, the first government-printed U.S. revenue stamps were issued. These new stamps were inscribed for use on every imaginable type of taxable paper transaction. Their denomination ranged from 1 cent all the way up to $200. After the war ended, however, revenue stamps and the taxes they represented still continued. Revenue stamps served to pay tax duties on items that came under two main categories: proprietary and documentary. Propriety stamps paid tax duties on goods like alcohol and tobacco and were also used for various services, while documentary stamps paid duties on legal documents, mortgage deeds, stocks, and a fair number of other legal dealings. For the first 12 years, George Washington was the only subject featured on U.S. revenue stamps, the engraved image modeled after a painting by Gilbert Stuart. Then, in 1875, an allegorical figure of liberty finally appeared. Printing of this issue continued until 1878. To confirm that taxes were paid, a revenue stamp was purchased, which would in turn pay the tax duty involved. The stamp was then affixed to the taxable item. The cancellation of these stamps was usually done in pen and ink, while hand-stamped cancellations were seldom used. The first issues were printed on hard, brittle paper, and later printed on soft woven paper of varying thickness. Colors were generally dull for stamps printed before 1868. The stamps were issued in sheets perforated with 12-gauge perforations, or imperforate, meaning solid sheets with no perforations. Among the more notable instances of tax stamp usage occurred in the photography trade. As the Civil War progressed, the demand for photographs of family members, soldiers going off to war, and returning war heroes increased dramatically, but not without the notice of the federal government, who saw the advent as an opportunity to raise much-needed revenue for the war. On August 1, 1864, the Internal Revenue Department passed a photograph tax requiring photographers to pay a tax on the sale of their photographs. By 1864, there were no photography tax stamps issued, so other stamps were substituted, typically the proprietary or playing card revenue stamps, usually affixed to the back of the photograph. Already burdened with high overhead costs and scarcity of materials because of the war, large photography companies organized and petitioned Congress, complaining that they were shouldering too much of the tax burden that would have been placed on the public. After exactly 2 years, their constant efforts resulted in the tax being repealed on August 1, 1866. Several other widely used products, such as cotton, tobacco, and alcohol, were also charged a proprietary tax, which appreciably contributed to the revenues generated. The Commissioner of Internal Revenue took bids for the printing and production of the first revenue stamps and awarded the contract to Butler and Carpenter of Philadelphia, who were paid $19,080 to produce 106 printing plates, including the rolls, dies, and all material necessary to maintain stamp production. For reasons unknown, the bill from Butler and Carpenter was never settled by the U.S. government until many years later, but not after Butler and Carpenter wrote and appealed numerous times to the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue, the Honorable J.J. Lewis, about the matter. Because of the long wait involved, one of the major points of contention was the appreciable amount of increase for materials between the time the agreement was made and when the bill was finally settled. When the Civil War ended, it did not mean an end to revenue taxes, as the federal government still had not paid the $2.7 billion in debt it had acquired. 3 distinct revenue stamp series were produced to pay the taxes during this 21-year period until the excise tax was finally repealed. The second issue of revenue stamps were documentary stamps and issued in 1871. Because of many reports about the fraudulent reuse of revenue stamps, typically with the cancellation ink washed off or otherwise removed, a letter of May 31, 1867, from government officials in Wall Street was sent to Internal Revenue Commissioner E.A. Rollins expressing the concern that the U.S. government loses thousands of dollars daily by stamps being used a second time. The letter advised that all stamps be printed in a pale yellow color. This particular suggestion, however, was not taken up by Butler and Carpenter, but instead responded to the problem by producing stamps of a lighter shade and on a paper that more readily absorbed the cancellation ink. This chameleon paper contains silk fibers that can be seen from the naked eye. The entire second series, with the exception of the $200 issue, was printed in the same bicolor combination, with the portrait of Washington printed in black and the framework in blue, with various ornate designs popular during that period. Taxes were also levied on alcohol and tobacco products, and a variety of such stamps were printed for this purpose. Typically, the stamp would be affixed in such a way as to seal the given container, where upon opening the stamp would be damaged. For example, revenue stamps for beer tax were issued to brewers in sheet form, where an individual stamp was cut from it and used as a seal over the opening in a barrel of beer. To access the beer, the stamp would have to be punctured, thus prohibiting its reuse. Because the second issue of revenue stamps were all printed in the same blue and black colors, they were often difficult to distinguish at a glance by the Internal Revenue employees. Subsequently, a third issue of stamps with similar designs and some variations as the second issue, but with distinctive colors assigned to the various denominations released between 1871 and 1872. On June 13, 1898, 15 years after the repeal of the excise tax, Congress passed the War Revenue Act of 1898 to provide badly needed funding for the Spanish-American War. The law was to become effective on July 1, 1898, leaving only 17 days to produce the badly needed stamps. In anticipation of the law's passage, the Bureau of Printing and Engraving had already commenced work on the dies and printing plates for the new stamps. However, they were unable to issue the stamps when the law went into effect. To meet the demand for revenue stamps, existing stocks of standard postage stamps were overprinted with the initials IR, meaning Internal Revenue, for use as revenue stamps. Initials are faint on issues with denominations of 8, 10, and 15 cents. In the continuation of providing funding for the Spanish-American War, Congress authorized a tax on a wide range of goods and services, including various alcohol and tobacco products, tea, and other amusements, and also on various legal and business transactions, bills of lading, manifests, and marine insurance. Further revenue stamp issues occurred in 1914 and several times between 1917 and the 1950s, finally being discontinued on December 31st, 1967. I hope you've enjoyed today's moment in history. If you want to learn even more history, please stop by my blog that can be found on my website, www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And please consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the bell icon to receive notification of new episodes that release the second and fourth Friday of every month. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day.